Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan, along with Kathryn Peterson. And as we love to do each and every Wednesday, we're dropping a new episode with a topic that we hope will encourage you, the entrepreneurial spirit out there in the sales world or the small business ownership world. We, of course, come from the housing industry, but we know many of our listeners are outside of the housing industry, but you probably live in houses. So I'm just saying, we may all be under the same umbrella. And many of you have talked about this fall season that we are entering into. Depending on when you're listening, you may be catching this at the beginning of the fall, maybe somewhere in the middle, but it feels like there's a shift. There's a shift in some of the economic events that are happening. There's a shift in some of the market conditions that we're experiencing. And with shift, there's an opportunity to look at a reframe and a reset. So that's what we're going to call this episode. And Kathryn points out wisely as we prep for this one that it's also coming into a season where many of us need to be thinking about how we wind down this year and begin to reframe and reset for our New Year's plan. But I won't unpack the whole agenda. I want to welcome my co-host into the frame. Kathryn, always great to see you.
Good to see you too, Michael. Excited for this time of the year, and this one will be fun today. So
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
let's get right into it.
I'm happy to. And yeah, you're right. It is a fun time of year, depending on where our listeners are tuned in. Some of our friends down in the Sun Belt are like, fall. Yeah, well, I guess my calendar says that. But you happen to live in maybe one of the most gorgeous fall environments in the United States of America in the Great Rocky Mountains. So yeah, I'm sure it is a great time at Camp Peterson. I'm sure it's a great time. All right, so reframe and reset. When you hear this topic, give me some thoughts that come to mind. Where does your mindset initially go when it's fall and it's time to reframe?
So for me, I think, okay, it's a change of the seasons. It's a change of maybe perspective. And it's a time to plan. It's a time to recap. It's a time to celebrate. So I think all those things are kind of what go into, because I think recap is good, reframe and reset. So all of those, I think it's a good time of the year to do that, especially since we're past the summer season.
Yeah, when that's really great because I think when I'm having one-on-one sessions with clients, one of the things I'll point out to them, because if I'm being honest, many of them by this point in the year, they've kind of lost track of their New Year's business plan that's now a good 9 months old, maybe 10
Yeah.
months old. And all they're in whatever present tense that they're in. They're in whatever current reality that is happening. And I'm trying to grab that document while it still has some relevance and remind them, hey, let's quickly look back at this. Let's reflect on
Mhm.
what you wrote. How are we doing? How are we doing in terms of the things that you said were going to be important this year, the things you committed to do, the things that you committed to learn, the events you committed to attend? And it's interesting when we do this, we find out that sometimes that's helpful in, oh my gosh, that I did say that, and that is still important to me. It just wasn't top of mind. So if that happens with you, Kathryn, how do you handle looking back at documents you created when you did your prep for 2025 when there's still some time on the clock here in the fall season? What's your mindset as you review some of your plans?
I think some of it you forget what you've accomplished and you're
Mm.
like, "Oh, yeah, I did that. I did that. I did that." And that even happened to me this weekend. I had a list of things I wanted to get done when Todd was out of town and I was like, "Oh, I haven't done this. I haven't done that." And I'm like, "Well, wait a minute, but I did knock out this, that, and that." And so you realize, "Oh yeah, there are some pretty big milestones that I just got through and whizzed past and you forget that you even did it." So, because you're on to the next project.
So I think that let's start there and agree for any of our listeners because you're indicative of I think the experience that all of them are probably capable of having, which is it is a good time to go back and maybe that's the first takeaway is you might find out that it's really encouraging. You've accomplished more than you remember. And that would make
Yeah.
sense because we're all busy. We're all managing a lot of moving parts, both at home and at work. So a good exercise to maybe encourage you that, okay, as hard as this year may have been, you've done some good things. Okay, now let's say you're in that headspace. Let's say you've been able to look at those. How do you handle the things that haven't yet happened? But let's say you've put some effort into them, they just haven't really happened. How do you process those things?
Well, I think there's two categories. There's okay, great. I started this project, but I realized it's actually not an impactful project. And is it time to abandon that project? Or did I just not commit to it and I still really want to commit to that goal? And then what steps do I need to take between now and, let's say, end of October to get that moving again?
Okay, I love this topic because we've talked about the difference between reasons and excuses, and that
Yeah.
sounds like one of those opportunities. So, how are you able to be self accountable to, I just haven't put the effort into that I wanted? Is that just a natural honesty that you have, or do you need some help? Do you need an outside voice? Do you run it by a team member? Do you run it by someone in the group? Do you run it by your coach? Like, how do you know that you're really holding yourself accountable to what you know you said you would do?
I think it depends a little bit on the why. Why did I
Mm.
initially come up with that goal? What did I want to get out of that goal? And does that still apply? So let's say it was, hey, I wanted to have a summer party. Well, it like what was the purpose of that? And it's probably a little late for a summer party. So we did do our summer party, by the way, but just as an example. So it depends a little bit on the, like how applicable it was. And like there's an organization I'm a part of that essentially shut down. So goals I had around that may not work and I might have to reframe those a little bit. So I think it just dives into part of that. And if you're just doing it to say, at this point, I don't know, say, okay, great, that summer party you were going to do. Do you want to do that next year? Or could that be a fall party? Or could that be a Christmas party? What does that look like? Let's plan for it earlier so we're more prepared. So some of that kind of stuff can be helpful to think
Y-
about too.
Your answer started off really wisely, so I want to make sure our audience didn't miss that. You quickly pivoted, but the first thing you said is, the purpose. What was the reason why? And I think that's such an important thing to ask because many times when we're planning, we plan with some sense of hopefulness. Our ambition is rooted in I'd like to, or I want to, or I see other people doing this. And so we put things into our plan, but they're maybe not really grounded in a purpose. They just seem like a good idea. And there's a place for good ideas. I don't want to minimize that, but it's really good that your initial reaction was, well, what was the purpose of that goal I set, or that project I committed to, or that discipline I was going to execute on? And we may find out that through further evaluation, there was no clear purpose, and it's okay to
Mhm.
either let it go, or maybe, as you were starting to do, reframe it as, okay, does it have to be the way you said it, or could there be a different way to get it done? All of those seem like really healthy outcomes once you ask the question why first, because once you've done that, you get really clear
Mm.
really fast on, was this really something I committed to, or was this just an idea I had?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And we do add projects based on ego, based on other someone telling us that we should have this as a project or as a focus. So it is good to dive into those.
Yeah, I want to encourage us as we pivot here that if that's you, if people are putting things on you, or you've just got, maybe you're a people pleaser by nature and you feel like, oh, I should do that. That's what they would want me to do. That it's okay. I mean, first of all, let's acknowledge it's okay that that's where your head goes, or where your mindset is. This is not shaming anybody for where their mindset starts, but you do have an opportunity, if that's your mindset, to decide that's an area I want to grow. So if you're in the process of reframing, maybe just this exercise alone of realizing there's some things I did and some things I didn't do. And maybe the reason why is I was never really that emotionally attached to this idea because maybe it wasn't even my idea. It was somebody else's idea, or some. It could be a healthy time to ask yourself, am I going to continue embracing commitments that aren't really rooted in my own commitment? And if you're ready to make that shift, I think a lot of that comes back to mindset. And maybe that's a different episode to unpack, but really good to separate those things. Let's carry that forward, Kathryn. Once you're in that mindset of, okay, I'm now ready to start reframing some of these things, what do you tend to do next? Like, how do you handle that with your team, for instance? Because you're not the only one reframing. You sometimes what you're reframing involves other people, maybe their roles, maybe their seats on the bus are shifting. How do you handle that with your team?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think some of it is sitting down, and we just had a meeting last week. We had disked everybody and gone through and said, okay, here's kind of where you guys have different strengths and how can we lean into those a little bit to shift things around so that things are more natural and more comfortable. So some of it can be that of, okay, if here's our big goal and here's all the parts, great. Do we want to spend time on this project? And if so, who's going to take these parts and pieces based on their strengths? So I think there's some of that that happens, but it's also reframing me of, okay, my disc is like, I don't have a lot of high eyes on my team. They're not going to be the ones who take over sales calls. That's just probably not in their lane. So because of that, what can we do to put more and more of
Mm.
the, let's call it tasks off of my plate and onto them so that I can spend more time in that high eye space. So, and go back to our disc. We've had some podcasts on disc that someone can listen to if they don't know what I'm talking about. So, I think some of that is reframing and a little bit of setting different goals for the roles.
Yeah, for those of you thinking that, Kathryn's got a plate or a frisbee or some sort of disc object, not exactly. She's exactly correct when she says we've unpacked that. It's a behavioral styles profile that Building Champions has used for going on 30 years now, and it's really helpful because it doesn't look at how smart you are. It doesn't look at right or wrong. It looks at behavioral style and how that translates into your communication style. And so it helps us understand both natural and adaptive tendencies that we all have. And so, Kathryn, what you're doing that is, I think, super smart as a leader is you're looking at your team saying, we're all a little bit different. And we probably know where strengths and weaknesses are when it comes to just operating. But what if we understood where that came from? Does it come from something that someone is naturally bent to do, or are they adapting? And we all adapt. Let's be very honest about that. But when we're adapting too far out of our natural style, this is where stress starts to show up. This is where our attitude starts to shift. This is maybe even
Mm.
where our performance starts to fail. And team members that are operating too far away from their natural style will at some point crack. We're all human beings. Nobody's gonna, be able to do that forever. And so, really smart of you to say, look, maybe we could shift some things around. Part of this reframe and reset is maybe we've got you doing certain tasks that you're certainly smart enough to do, you're capable of doing them, but it's causing a lot of stress. And what if we shifted those towards something you were more naturally drawn to do? And by the same token, maybe someone else would be more naturally drawn to do that very task. Really good to do that because in business, and for any of you listening out there, your business is always evolving. We tend to get in these ruts where we think, well, I do the same thing. It's the same routine over and over again, except the world is constantly changing around you. So if you're not
Mhm.
at least asking those questions from time to time, that very rut that you find yourself in could be, as you said, really challenging for your team because it starts with you as the leader. We also had that episode as well, the difference between leading and managing. And, managing is a lot of maintenance, but leading is helping people see something that doesn't currently exist. We're moving toward a new version of who we are. So, really great. So, when you gather your team, Kathryn, and let's say we're past maybe the evaluation, we've done the disc, we've talked about that, but now we're going to implement. How do you help the team move from, oh, that's a good idea to, I'm actually going to commit to do that, and I need your help making sure I do it well. What does that next step look like with your team?
So I think that comes down to the manager or leader. In
Mm.
the frequent meetings, like we have meetings on Tuesday, Thursday, and I do individual meetings saying, okay, great. Here's some things we talked about to put on your plate. Where are you at with training? Are you doing those? Do you need extra? Like, do we need some steps in our process so that you remember to do those every time on the loan? What else can I take off of my plate that you've thought of to give to you? So I think it's just readdressing those again and again and again, as because sometimes you have to push people to learn something new or push people to train somebody because they hold things close. And so it's saying, hey, have you trained her on that yet? Hey, have you trained her on that yet? Where are we at with moving this to the next person? So it's just following up from those same goals that we set at the meeting.
Your intuition is so natural that I want to make sure our audience doesn't miss it. You have these meetings already scheduled, and I can't tell you how many times I run into a small business owner or an entrepreneurial salesperson who resists meetings because meetings seem like, drudgery of some sort. Like, meeting, like that takes me away from my work in order to meet is somewhat of the attitude that I often find. And what I really find when we dig into that is because, well, your meeting isn't really well defined. It doesn't have a purpose. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't have a hard start and a hard stop. It doesn't have accountability around it. Those of you that know the EOS model understand this very well. I think their framework on meetings is excellent. So make that in your notes. If you're looking for a great meeting framework, check out EOS. You can find plenty out on Google. But you're naturally meeting with these folks both together as a group and then in one-on-ones, and those are really key ingredients. So kudos to you for doing it, but I want to make sure our audience understands that's intentionality on your part as the leader. You're blocking that time out, and it's not just, hey, what do we want to talk about? You're really clear on this is the purpose of the meeting. And so those follow-ups become somewhat of the natural culture of the environment you've created. And maybe that's my pivot point is, we often say, leaders, you're ridiculously in charge. You're going to get some combination of what you create or allow. And Kathryn, you're creating a cadence of accountability so that you can really allow people to experience the growth that they say they want.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
All right, so let's look at then one final component, and we'll bring this thing into the home stretch. So as we set this time up for some reset and some reframing, we've reviewed, we've maybe celebrated our wins, we've found some gaps that we're going to identify, we've maybe even identified behavioral styles, we're going to move some people around into better suited roles. All of that sounds like momentum and it's positive. But we said at the top of the show that these are events that are happening for those of you listening in the fall of 2025. This is a time of year where we're also beginning to think about the year ahead. That's starting to hit the horizon. Is
Mm-hmm.
okay. This is the last quarter of the year. This is the last season of the year. How do you start, in addition to executing really well in the fourth quarter, how do you prepare yourself and later your team for that New Year's business planning process? Tell me a little bit about some of the seeds you're sowing right now ahead of the new year.
Well, some of it's planning. So to say, hey, what's a day that we have for a team meeting in December? And that date's set. What's a time that I can step away and plan? I've got a few conferences that I'm attending in October that'll also give me some ideas to put on that 2026 plan. So it's kind of setting up those times to think, okay, great, what are some ideas I have? I need to plan some space in my calendar to think and to meet and have a team retreat and do those things. And if those are in your calendar now, it's going to be a lot easier than if you're trying to set that up. And that's how we end up creating plans in January instead of December or November.
Yeah, I love this, and again, I feel like I'm highlighting things that I naturally already love, but it's great because we don't script our podcasts. These are
Mm-mm.
you could tell me anything you wanted as an answer to that question, but what you're doing, I think, is what I hope our audience hears is your calendar is not just an active to-do list of, okay, what are my appointments this week? You already know the hold dates heading into December. In fact, you're probably starting to seed your 2026 calendar with some of what, Covey would call the big rocks, things that are events that you already know about, maybe family time that you already know about. I mean, now that you've got, Kayla's schedule, you probably know when her semester ends and you've got certain time available as a family. All those things are true in addition to things like normal life. We all file taxes in the United States at roughly this, well, some of us file them at the same time. I guess some of us
Right.
do put in a little bit of a delay. Uh, but that's coming. You know that you need, your medical checkups, your dental checkups. I mean, these things all sound a little mundane until you don't get them scheduled. and then they sound stressful. So it's not just a team meeting to do some New Year's planning in December. You're already seeding those thoughts around there's a cadence to my calendar. And when I have those things already baked in, I don't have to stress out about when would we do that? How would we do that? We already know when. Now we just dial in the details of that agenda, and I think that's super smart. When your team's together, preview that for us, just so we can get a glimpse of that. Are there some things you do to prepare yourself for New Year's business planning, or there's some things that you do in that time that you would say these are kind of my best practices around that process might help people this fall start preparing for their version?
Yeah, I think it's good to look at the year, figure out kind of what worked and what didn't, who your top people were, who your top agents were, what your top activities were. Did you end up closing more primary, second, all that kind of stuff? And then also say, kind of do that for the team of, hey, you know, you had a goal of doing this and you did that. Here's some big things that we did as a team. And then after that recap, kind of go into more, okay, let's talk about some ideas of one of my questions is always, how can we serve our clients better in the next year? What can we do to kind of go above and beyond? And just throwing out some questions that are pre thought out, but not being attached to the answer, and so that you get some like raw ideas from other people as well as just me. And then I also like to talk about some goals that I have for the team, and a lot of times those are volume goals. And then we kind of make a plan, and everybody also sends me their goals. I have them work on a plan for themselves, and then they share that plan with the group.
Yeah, that's great. I hope what we gain from listening to you just riff on some of the things that now have become your best practices. They may feel a bit routine to you, but for some of you out there, you may feel like I wing it far too often. And so, the components I heard loud and clear was you have a process in which you review the year, both experientially and I think to some degree with some data. Like we're going to actually scorecard it. How did we do against some of the numeric goals we set? This is deep diving, whether it's in the tracking tools that you keep or the accounting tools that you keep. Let's know where we are on that scorecard. And then it's really good. You have some reflective questions. They're designed to look at, some of those more experiential levels of measurement. And I think that's good for our teammates because they're not always doing that. We need to, from time to time, that's leadership. We need to inspire them to think differently about old problems so they can come up with new solutions. And that doesn't happen when we leave them alone to do that. It happens when we lead first, lead by example, and then we really show them enough grace and respect to say, hey, wherever you are, let's take that step forward. Similar to our episode on Kaizen, it's an opportunity to get a little bit
Mhm.
better, and so I'm glad to hear that's present. Last thing, and Kathryn, when you're calendaring out that year ahead and you're beginning to anchor point these things, what's really important to you and what's really important to your team as they look out into the year ahead and those the cadence of the year is going to get mapped out? What are some of the things our audience would like to hear? I riffed on a few things that obviously are common to most of us, but what are some things that you talked about, these events that are coming up you're going to this fall? Do you start looking ahead at where the event calendar is, or what are some of the things you
Mhm.
typically do as you look ahead into the calendar year?
Yeah, definitely those, definitely some of that season stuff of, hey, we're typically busier in May, and the
Mm.
summer season picks up. So what are some things we can do in January, February to prep? Let's talk through vacations. Hey, someone has a 2-3 week vacation that they're thinking of doing in the fall. Let's talk through that so that we don't have 5 people out. So some of that we can definitely do, but I think all of it, also some of it's more just the like long term of, hey, what are future hires that we want to do? What would be a good next step for the team? What are people's goals around what else they want to learn and take on? Does someone want to train and get their license? Do they want to get a special designation? All those things could be relevant to our listeners' team as well.
So I think the nugget I just took from that is there's seasonality to your business, and most of us understand what that means. Most of us aren't on, full capacity 12 months straight. We have some ebbs and flows depending on the market we're in or the product we
Hmm.
work with or the customers we serve. And you're thinking strategically about, hey, we already know we're going to have some months where maybe our production has less volume. Let's take advantage of those. Let's get our education in. Let's learn our new skill during that time. Let's get some training. I love hearing that because you're being proactive. And that's what I think a great leader does is they look ahead and say, okay, these are the times where we can take advantage of those dips and really use them well so that we'll look back when things are really screaming at a high production level and we say, well, I'm glad we knocked those out when we did. Kathryn, thanks for letting me, interview you. I know you're my co-host on this podcast, and I don't want to, by any means, make this seem like, you're on the hot seat. But you handle episodes like these so well because you're doing the very things, and I think that's the definition of integrity. We're learning that you're doing the very same things that we talk about encouraging others to do, and you're not a perfect person, nor am I. But we hope that as we share some of these things, that they help our audience listen. Any closing takeaways on this topic before we wrap up this episode?
No, I would say that the thing we didn't talk a ton about is a full reset. So sometimes you might just need to take a whole day and just say, hey, no, nothing, no screens, no, I'm going to take a journal. I'm going to take a list of some things to think through, and I'm going to call that a reset. And so think through what will get you in the right mind space to get through some of these things we've talked about so that you can be really, really dialed in before the end of the year.
That's great advice. I love it. And you immediately made me think of my 12-hour walk. I know we highlighted that one and we've had a few guests that have done it, but boy, was that a great way to unplug for a day and think deeply about all of this. So those of you that are interested, find that episode in the backlog of the Building Bigger Lives podcast. But we'll put a wrap on today's podcast topic, the reset and the reframe. And I hope that as you're thinking through how you reset and you reframe for the season ahead, that you learn some things from my friend Kathryn Peterson. And if you've got questions, I know she and I would both love to engage those with you. You'll find us on YouTube at Building Bigger Lives. The comment section is a great place to engage with those topics. And for those of you listening on audio, you might be on Audible, you might be on Apple. We appreciate you tuning in, and we always love it when you share an episode that you know will help someone else. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon on another episode of Building Bigger Lives.